The information provided by Taming Lightning is designed to provide helpful information and to educate on the subject discussed. The information provided is true and complete to the best of our knowledge and is not intended to be used without professional guidance or supervision. All recommendations are made without guarantee on part of Taming Lightning and affiliates. Taming Lightning and affiliates disclaim any liability in connection with the use of this information. Welcome back, or welcome to the Taming Lightning podcast. I'm Percy Echols II. I'm the creator and host of Taming Lightning, as well as the emerging plasma tech at Pittsburgh Glass Center. Taming Lightning podcast features a series of conversations to help expand our understanding of plasma and neon light, looking beyond its associations with novelty and sign making, and to explore the potential for noble gases as an artistic medium. The intro is Boost by Joachim Karud. Joachim is a Swedish artist who loves to produce chill and happy music, and does so for copyright-free use. Be sure to support his music by giving credit when used, subscribing, and or by donation. You can find him on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, SoundCloud, and Spotify. Hello, Lightning Tamers. This is episode 31, and in today's podcast, I'll be joined by Ben Orozco for chapter 1 of 4, Intro to Plasma series, in collaboration with GEEX, the Glass Education Exchange. This series is an introduction for glass educators and makers who might be new to the process, as well as an opportunity to introduce myself and my experiences. So with me, I have Ben Orozco. How you doing, Ben?
I'm doing great. It's finally great to talk to you.
I mean, it was interesting. We met through the Glass Factory Boda in Sweden. At that time, I was with Ed Kirshner and Jaime Guerrero for a class for plasma at the Glass Factory. And that was my real introduction to you, other than some emails beforehand.
Yeah, definitely. That was, I think, about a year ago, exactly.
Yeah.
So I was over there studying. I was based at the Glass Factory. I was doing an international exchange with the Fulbright program. So I lived in Sweden at the Glass Factory for about 9 months. And I was there helping out and getting some of the plasma facilities set up while I was also working on my own project. So it was great to work with you in that technical way.
Yeah, you had a lot to do to get that set up. You were really, I mean, I said in the, Instagram feed and all that stuff, you're pretty much our vanguard. Like, if you weren't there, I don't think we could have had that class work, if I'm really honest about it.
No, it was definitely, as I guess a budding neon technician, I was not expecting to also take on the work of learning the plasma fundamentals from the ground up when it came to building all that. So yeah, it was just like a really interesting experience, but I've totally got to learn about your process through that way, or I guess just more about how you function and all those nuances of working in plasma.
Yeah, it's certainly a worthy experience that a lot of people miss out when they are used to having facilities already primed and taken care of for them.
Definitely.
And something like neon or plasma, that's not quite there yet. It's not ready like that. So you're working with a new, a new community called GEEX, or Glass Education Exchange. Can you tell me and our listeners a little bit about that?
So GEEX, GEEX, is the Glass Education Exchange, and we are an online platform that supports the immediate and future needs of glass education through our programming, resource sharing, and communication. And this really came up with the pandemic as well as the 2020 uprising that was happening. There were a lot of signals that we needed to have some sort of online community for glass educators, because glass is something that people have needed to figure out how to reformat with the pandemic and also at the same time addressing some of the equity issues that we have in the glass community right now.
Hmm.
So we're really working to make sure that we can make glass more accessible and empower people who are both learning, teaching, making in glass. And this
Yeah,
episode is an example of that, where we really want to get your word out and I guess just share knowledge with the larger community about plasma and your story.
yeah, yeah. I mean, we've been, here in Pittsburgh. I'm at the Pittsburgh Glass Center. We're kind of feeling the same challenges, and so having a community or a platform that helps address that, as everyone has to make that shift, whether it's education spaces or even gallery spaces,
Hmm.
is pretty awesome. So what's your position there at Geeks? I know that you take a pretty significant role there.
Yep. So I'm the web manager and the designer for the platform. And so that's what I do to uphold the visual aspect of the, I guess, community, making sure that information is really easily accessible, but also interesting and hopefully inspiring glass educators to look into all the work that we're doing. And then I guess outside of that, in general, I am an artist and designer who has been working in neon for about 4 years now, primarily just doing sculptures, a little bit of glass work, which also included some of the stuff I was doing in Sweden. But I guess now I would love to talk about what you do and especially talk about all these different identities that you have. And Taming Lightning is a start as a podcaster, but tell us a little bit about what you're doing at the Pittsburgh Glass Center and what you do on a day-to-day basis with Taming Lightning.
Yeah, so yeah, there's a lot of different many identities that I have kind of collected and switched around and have embodied over this time, and it's really interesting to talk about what do I do. I've been at the Pittsburgh Glass Center for the last I was the last 4 years. I
Hmm.
came here to Pittsburgh for the Pittsburgh Glass Center's technician apprenticeship program. So that's a 1 year apprenticeship. You understand how the studio runs. You're in behind the scenes. You're integrated in the discussion of decisions that PGC makes.
Hmm.
And uh, for me, after graduating, that was the place that helped me continue working in glass. I mean, a lot of us find that whatever thing you study, it's kind of hard to figure out what the next steps are at. And especially a medium like glass, where you need a specific specialized facility to do that, is very fortunate that I can come along and do that. Now, after that
Hmm.
apprenticeship, um, I, worked many other types of jobs, because I wanted to stay in Pittsburgh because of the Glass Center. So, as for who I am an glass artist or artist, but podcasting came along almost simultaneously with the apprenticeship, or in the case of being a technician.
Hmm.
So at the Pittsburgh Glass Center, I'm an independent contractor, but I'm also involved in the development of the facilities for neon and plasma that we want to bring to the Glass Center. And that
Hmm.
is all tied up in my apprenticeship. I had an opportunity to work on that because we received a donation of that equipment from to the Pittsburgh Glass Center and made that proposal. But if I'm going to say who I am now, I rather use the term alchemist. Uh, I'm not someone who is super proficient enough to call themselves a glass artist. I move in very different mediums, and glass makes you do that a little bit.
Definitely.
Um, you have to kind of use what you know and find where you can really push yourself in a medium that you're not quite familiar with the first time you handle it.
Hmm.
So with that, I'm using things like 3D printing. I'm using things like 3D modeling and animation, illustration. An alchemist is someone who takes all these different things and produces a product out of it. So one could call me a maker, but I'm not a maker. I'm someone who takes things and makes other things with it, which coincides with the whole podcasting thing. It's the way that I learn and understand plasma and meet the people that are in that field, as well as institutions and manufacturers and producers. So it's all tied in one. So the best title for me is alchemist.
Yeah, I think that does a really good job capturing all those traits because with your podcast and just with your own account on Instagram and the internet, we get to really see how you're delving into all these different facets. And as you're working in plasma, you are exploring all of these different processes in order to actually put the studio together, like you mentioned, where it's really not just making one thing, where you are sometimes just making things to make other things in glass.
Yeah, exactly.
And so the other part too is how you're almost like a open textbook where you really do share your research and your knowledge, and when you're doing your alchemy, how you're sharing your results, really being open and transparent and sharing a lot of that knowledge. And so I'm curious for you, if we're introducing plasma, what is one of the most common questions that you get for someone who just doesn't know how it works, or they've never done it before, or they're in glass, but they just have never experienced plasma?
From anyone who's asked me any questions about plasma, it's always in the space of someone who has never done glass, has never done any type of anything related to that field whatsoever. It's really a general question: is how do you do that?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that question is kind of really hidden as how does it work, or like how do I learn to do that process, and that becomes very complicated. I mean, if you're going to step back into how I was introduced into plasma, I was introduced through a workshop at Pilchuck through Patrick Collentine. And, at that time I was experienced maybe 3 years into glass. And so I had the basis of understanding how to manipulate the material of glass, which is one part of it. Other part is, well, how do you make it so you can fill it? And then how do you light it up and power it? Those are like three categories of very diverse amount of skills and knowledges. So what I've been doing recently, or at least over time, is trying to figure out by talking to different guests on the podcast and, tying back into being the open book, is that the very nature of what we have online and internet has allowed me to see other people share what they've done. Taking all the information from guest podcast people that shared their information about what they're doing, about their system, what they're using, who their distributors are. I want to be able to tie that stuff together, and that's very hard to do. That when you put that down on paper and try to simplify it into maybe 20 or so terms of items, that's a lot to consider, and that's where I try to come up with something called like the elements of plasma, which has been shared a little bit online.
Yeah, and I think the elements of plasma are a really great place to start. The most important thing to remember in this entire process is that a lot of these skills that we'll be talking about in plasma all really begin from a core set of basic fundamentals. And a lot of these things we can apply to the larger practice of glass or just making. So after a quick break, we'll get back and we'll introduce the basics, the elements of plasma.
Hi, I'm Emily, the Assistant Director of Glass Education Exchange, aka GEEX. Are you learning or teaching glass in the middle of a pandemic? That's right, I'm talking about COVID-19. GEEX is here to support the present and ongoing needs of educators and co-learners through virtual programming and resources, including our GEEX Talks lecture series, our calendar of public glass-related events, community spotlights, and other programming like our monthly book club and weekly movement class. All of our programs are free, donation-based, or low cost to increase accessibility. You can check us out on the web at geeks.glass and on all social platforms as Geeks Glass. That's one word.
And we're back. So now let's talk about one of your first plasma pieces, Percy, the Telltale Truth. This is a sculpture that you made from 2015, and we'll have an image on the GEEX website and the Taming Lightning podcast to look at. So I generally see a lung system that's been made from two lungs that are consisting of masks, two faces that are pointing away from each other, a airway that's illuminating and glowing throughout these clear masks, and then a windpipe that's been attached to the top of the glowing lines that form the passageway that's sandblasted. And so I see all of these different facets and forms of transparency and light working with molds that are clear and sandblasted elements and how those diffuse nicely, as well as a white and orange gas combination that's glowing throughout this piece. Tell us a little bit more about this piece.
From a structural standpoint, I'm using various processes in order to make the piece. One of the things that I will kind of keep going back to is how glass forces you to expand not just your processes in glass, but materials you use in your artistic practice altogether. In glass, I'm using the glass as a lens, transparency, having light come through it. So these mask portions are not hand sculpted in hot glass, but they are sculpted in wax and creating a blown mold, a single part blow mold that I can create a hollow form with. So that's one part of the process where my hands and abilities to sculpt cannot be matched in the active process of glass sculpting, but can be done through wax sculpting. There's some solid sculpted work, such as the kind of like the trachea windpipe area that is done with solid glass. And then there's flame working using glass tubing to make the kind of airway that leads into the lungs, where it's mostly illuminated there with the plasma.
And this is a piece that you made at school during your undergrad?
Yeah, I made this during my undergrad program at Illinois State University. It was for the BFA, the Bachelor's in Fine Arts program, which concludes with a thesis or an exhibition at the end. Okay. It's one of many different pieces, but I felt this piece was the most kind of well conceived of all of them, because you have to look at not just what you're trying to create, the form, the structure, the shape, how it's assembled, and how you're going to get those things, oriented and placed in space. So using metal and steel to fabricate the armature was a part of that process, but a lot of that came towards the end. So it's kind of important to have that idea kind of well conceived prior to your construction and making of the pieces.
So let's talk about the plasma section here, which acts as that airway or passageway. How would you break this down if we had to put it into simple elements?
Well, you know that the part is glass, but I'm going to start from the opposite direction of the parts needed to make this happen. So we're starting from the wall. You need to have power. And so one of the most important parts of that, besides the actual piece, is having the transformer. Now, this is different than neon. We may probably cover that later on about the differences between neon and plasma. But this is a single end high frequency electricity that comes through that transformer from the wall, which leads into the electrode. The electrode is a small metal glass component that bridges the outside and the inside of the glass vessel, allows electricity to travel from the transformer to the gas inside. The gas mixture, which can be various different gases, it can just be a single gas, but some of the common gases we use in this process are neon, argon, krypton, xenon, and sometimes additions of nitrogen or oxygen are introduced. In this piece, it's strictly neon, and it tends to have a different effect on the inside than what you've seen in a neon tube. And we'll go over that in later parts. And then you have the glass envelope, which is a closed form. You guys have done glass, you'll know a closed form is something that comes to a very tiny opening that is not meant to carry anything, but you need that tiny little hole and a small little tube that comes off of it in order to be able to seal it up in the end. So you have your glass envelope, your gas mixture, your transformer, and your electrode in that process. And that's what makes up that illuminated element that's in the piece.
And so plasma is really not just one process, but it's a whole mindset and a whole set of greater processes when it comes to electricity, craftsmanship, your safety measures, your experimentation. I think this piece does a really good job of both showing how plasma can interact as its own, as you have this slowly undulating form that is changing colors just through the way that the vessel and the gas and the power are all working together. But then you also have the larger artistic form where you're thinking about how the light itself is actually going to perform and exist. And so tell us how and why you use light in this piece and what drew you to make sort of an organ that has light as one of the central parts.
So I've always really been drawn to light, whether it's LEDs or various forms of other types of LED like light, like EL wire and things like that, whether it's fire or whatever. So in this piece, I wanted to try something that was new. And one of the main things I haven't mentioned yet about plasma is that it has an interactive component to it. It's a very active light. It doesn't always have to be that way. And in this piece, I chose to not have this crazy active line that you would see in plasma balls or plasma globes, the objects that you would see at Spencer's, where you got all these little tendrils of light that you touch and it starts to draw to your hand. There is a bit of interactive nature with this piece itself, though I advise people not to touch it. They can kind of see that it glows a bit brighter when they move towards it. So again, like I enjoy that interactive nature of that medium because it adds another layer that you can play with. But the choice of a very soft light is very important for this piece because I don't want it to compete with the details that are in the mask or in the other parts of the sculpture. So choosing a very soft light was a what do you call it? A very
A necessity, or just something that it's something that really fit well, or it emoted what you wanted it to, right?
right. But I want to jump back to what you mentioned about the whole mindset thing because plasma has made me expand to a lot of different things, and we'll kind of be talking about this throughout the future episodes. But I was really interested in chemistry, so doing the stuff in plasma wasn't a huge jump. I still had to learn. And through working with plasma, it made me expand into all the different things that we would be doing in our daily lives and how you would learn to do things. When you're talking about something like cleanliness, well, that cleanliness could be an aesthetic nature. It could be a nature of the process, whether you're using glues or whatever it may be. But that cleanliness also tailors into how you approach a problem, how you solve it. It also can factor in the specific processes in other components, whether it's technical in maintenance stuff that you have to do for your system or do for your pieces themselves. So these tiny little things that we're pulling out here, they expand beyond that process and make you think about things very differently. And that's something I really enjoy about plasma in general is beyond the light and be able to make these cool things happen is that I'm starting to expand and connect with the world outside of art.
Yeah, the alchemy of it all really, I think, comes through when we think about all these different aspects and traits. And so I think that's a really great way to describe what you do and then also a little how you do it. So now that we've broken down these elements of plasma, we're going to go into each of these main sections as chapters in the series. So chapter 2, our next chapter, is taking shape, where we'll talk about the art of shaping your light, aka vessel making. And we'll get into a few technical considerations to think about as you're making those vessels. We're hoping that these techniques can hopefully inspire your own practice in glass for vessel making and thinking about it in an entirely new way. Chapter 3, It's Lit, Chemistry of Collaboration. So once you make your vessel, there's this whole process of lighting it up, and it's something that is alchemical. And we'll be working with plasma makers and artists to collaborate to get started. Chapter 4, Starting Your Plasma Journey. So Percy's journey in plasma is one of self-starting and learning on his own and figuring out how to begin not just on his own research, but through working with others. And so we hope this episode will give you some steps and pointers towards building your own plasma setup. The series in total is Learn to Apply, but we also want to inspire you to think about your own making practice in a new way. For this episode, we'll have resources and an episode of playlists that Percy has picked out from his in the notes to get started. And we'll continue this conversation in Chapter 2. Great talking with you, Percy.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. It was great.
GEEX and Taming Lightning are making a 4-part episode series that's functionally a survey or lecture in podcast format. Percy has produced Taming Lightning for 3 years with 30 episodes released. Percy has a full-time job in the hotel industry and uses his spare time to generate this content. In a few episodes, he literally goes the extra mile and travels to provide a personal touch to the conversation. GEEX believes the glass community is incredibly lucky to have this resource, and it's our goal to replace that luck with financial support. We have an initial goal of raising $2,800 to support this 4-episode series. That translates down to 100 listeners chipping in $7 each per episode. We hope that you'll support Percy's expertise and help us establish precedent by compensating valued voices in the field. Every donation really counts. We have a link in the show notes to get started. If you're on a computer, click the donation button on our Taming Lightning page. If you're listening on the go, send a Venmo donation to @GeeksGlass with the word plasma. That's PLASMA. Thanks in advance for your support.
Thank you for listening to the Taming Lightning podcast. Music credits to the following artists. The introduction, Boost by Joachim Karud. The intermission, Sunny Side by One, that's ONE. Credits, The Process by Lakey Inspired. I'd like to thank GEEX for inviting me to collaborate for this series, which is a mixture of an interview and lecture, using my experience as a pathway to the continual learning and understanding of plasma, which is yet to have a comprehensive resource for guidance. And while that can and has been frustrating, it's also been fun finding various sources to tackle a subject. In this collaboration, I'd like to thank the director, Helen Lee, for starting the conversation, assistant director, Emily Leach, whom you got to hear pop in during the break and at the end, and the graphic designer and web manager, Ben Orozco, who will be co-hosting for the remainder of the series. Even in this first step, I find myself taking notes and adopting a more organized approach with feedback to improve the flow of the podcast, including solidifying a release date for the podcast, which will be every third Thursday. This collaborative series will be released in October, December, February, and April. Lastly, I'd like to thank the Pittsburgh Glass Center for supporting me as a place of research and inspiration, as well as encouraging me to pursue this project. And the Plasma Art Alliance, where I have access to a well of knowledge and connects me to some amazing and supportive people. Links for the podcast and for supporting the 4-part series will be provided in the show notes. Feel free to share, comment, and subscribe. And as always, be safe, be healthy, and be strong, and I'll see you next time.